The taste of betrayal is something you never forget. Even death can't wash it away. I know because I died with that bitter taste on my tongue, watching my fiancé David kiss my best friend, Elena, at my own funeral. Yes, my funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me even as my soul watched from somewhere between heaven and hell. But let me start from the beginning because every revenge story needs proper context. My name is Olivia Katherine Morrison, heir to Morrison Industries, a multi-billion-dollar empire my grandfather built from nothing. At 24, I was everything a man like David could want. Beautiful, wealthy, and stupidly trusting. The perfect victim. David Wellington came into my life like a prince from a fairy tale. Tall, handsome, charming, with just enough financial struggle to make him seem genuine. He worked at a mid-level marketing firm, drove a decent car, and always insisted on paying for our dates, even when I could see him mentally calculating the cost. It was endearing. It made me believe he loved me for me, not my money. Elena Rodriguez had been my best friend since college. Dark-haired, petite, with those big, innocent eyes that made everyone want to protect her. She was also David's ex-girlfriend from years ago, though they assured me that was ancient history. "We're better as friends," she'd laugh, squeezing my hand. "Besides, I would never betray you, Olivia. You're like a sister to me. Sister?" The word tasted like poison now. The engagement happened exactly 18 months into our relationship. David proposed at the same restaurant where we had our first date, with a modest ring he'd saved up for months to buy. I cried, happy tears, and said yes immediately, already planning our perfect wedding. That's when everything started to change, though I was too blind to see it. Elena suddenly needed more help with everything. Her rent, her car payments, her mother's medical bills. Being the generous friend I was, I helped without question. David, meanwhile, started having more work emergencies and guy nights that kept him away from me. When I suggested we move in together before the wedding, he insisted we wait. "I want to do this the traditional way," he said, kissing my forehead. "It'll make our wedding night even more special." The months leading to our wedding were a blur of planning and increasing distance. David seemed distracted, Elena seemed nervous, and I felt like I was losing both of them without understanding why. But I pushed those feelings down. I was just being paranoid, surely. The wedding was set for June 15th. 3 weeks before that date, I decided to surprise David at his apartment with his favourite takeout, and maybe finally have that conversation about what was bothering him. I used my spare key to let myself in, calling out his name as I entered. The takeout bags rustled in my hands as I walked toward the bedroom, following the sounds of movement. What I saw in that doorway destroyed me completely. David and Elena in his bed, our bed, since I'd helped him pick out those sheets. She was wearing my engagement ring on a chain around her neck, the one I'd left at his place after a romantic evening 2 nights ago. They were so lost in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there, frozen in horror. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the pregnancy test sitting on his nightstand, with its 2 clear pink lines, and the prenatal vitamins beside it. And Elena's hand protectively curved over her still flat stomach as David whispered sweet promises about their future together. I dropped the takeout. The sound finally made them turn around. "Olivia!" Elena gasped, scrambling for the sheets. But she didn't look guilty. She looked triumphant, like she'd been waiting for this moment. David at least had the decency to look ashamed. "This isn't... We can explain..." "Explain what?" I whispered. "That you've been sleeping with my best friend, that she's pregnant with your baby, that she's wearing my engagement ring like some kind of trophy." Elena sat up suddenly confident. "Olivia, you have to understand. David and I have history. Real history. We never stopped loving each other. Then why didn't you just tell me?" The words came out as a broken sob, David ran his hands through his hair. Because we needed time to plan, to figure things out. To figure out how to get my money, you mean? The silence that followed told me everything. I looked at Elena, really looked at her. The designer purse in the corner that I'd bought her for her birthday, the expensive skincare products on David's bathroom counter that she'd insisted I purchase because they were life-changing. The rent money I'd been giving her for months. "How long?" I asked quietly. Elena lifted her chin defiantly. "Since before you two started dating." The room spun around me. "What?" David finally found his voice. "Olivia, I did care about you. I do care about you. But Elena and we have something real." "Real?" I repeated numbly. "And my money? Was that real too?" They exchanged a look. That's when I knew for certain that this had all been planned. Every moment, every kiss, every "I love you" had been a carefully orchestrated lie designed to separate me from my fortune. I left that day in a haze of shock and heartbreak. I didn't call off the wedding immediately. I couldn't process what I learned well enough to make decisions. Instead, I drove aimlessly around the city, my mind reeling with memories that now looked completely different in hindsight. 3 days later, I was supposed to meet with our lawyers to sign the prenup. I'd insisted on one despite David's protests, mainly because my father had drilled it into my head that anyone marrying into the Morrison family needed to be protected against gold diggers. "Even if you trust them completely," he'd said, "protect yourself legally." I never made it to that meeting. Instead, I woke up in a hospital bed with tubes down my throat and my parents crying beside me. Apparently, I'd been in a car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light and hit me head-on while I was sitting at an intersection, lost in thought about my crumbling world. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, but the internal injuries were severe. Over the following weeks, I slipped in and out of consciousness, fighting infections and complications, while David and Elena played the part of devoted fiancé and worried best friend for my family. I heard them sometimes when they thought I couldn't understand. Elena would stroke my hand and cry about how sorry she was. David would sit beside my bed and talk about our future together once I recovered. All lies, all performance. In my lucid moments, I tried to tell my parents the truth, but the medications made me incoherent. They thought I was having hallucinations brought on by the trauma and pain medication. "She keeps saying David and Elena betrayed her," I heard my mother whisper to a nurse. "The poor thing is having anxiety dreams." I died on a Tuesday afternoon in September, exactly 3 months after I was supposed to marry David. My last conscious moment was seeing him kiss Elena in the hallway outside my room, her pregnancy finally starting to show under her loose sweater. But somehow, impossibly, I woke up. Not in the hospital. Not in my broken body. I woke up in my own bed, in my apartment, with sunlight streaming through familiar windows. The calendar on my nightstand read March 15th, exactly 3 months before I'd caught them together. I sat up slowly, my heart racing. My body felt strong and healthy. There were no scars, no pain, no tubes or machines. I looked exactly as I had before the accident. But my mind held every terrible memory of what was to come. A second chance. That's what this was. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and scrolled through my messages. There was one from David. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. Elena's making dinner for all of us." I stared at that message for a long time, remembering what I now knew. Tonight was supposed to be the dinner where Elena would casually mention her money troubles, and I would offer to help with her rent. It was also the night David would suggest we start looking at venues for our spring wedding. The night their plan would truly begin. But this time, I knew what they were really after. This time, I would be ready. I smiled for the first time since waking up. They thought they were so clever, playing the long game to steal my fortune and destroy my life. They had no idea that I remembered every detail of their betrayal, every lie they would tell, every manipulation they would use. This time, I would let them dig their own graves. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my lawyer. I need to schedule a prenup appointment, I wrote, and I want to make some very specific additions to the contract. The game was about to begin again, but this time I held all the cards. 2 hours later, I stood in front of my mirror practicing my smile. The same trusting, innocent expression that had made me such an easy target before. But behind my eyes burned the cold fire of calculated vengeance. My phone buzzed with another text from David. "Running a few minutes late, babe. Elena's excited to see you." I bet she was. I arrived at David's apartment at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing the soft pink dress he'd once said made me look angelic. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to play angel to 2 devils. "Olivia!" Elena rushed to embrace me, her performance flawless as always. She looked genuinely happy to see me, her dark eyes sparkling with what anyone else would mistake for affection. "You look absolutely gorgeous tonight." "Thank you," I said, hugging her back just as warmly. "Something smells amazing in here." David appeared from the kitchen, handsome as ever in his carefully casual button-down shirt. He kissed my cheek with practiced tenderness. "Elena's been cooking all afternoon. She wanted tonight to be special." Special indeed. This was the night they planned to start their financial bleeding of me in earnest. Over dinner, I watched them with new eyes. Every glance between them, every careful word, every staged moment of their deception unfolded exactly as I remembered. Elena's fork trembled slightly as she mentioned her unexpected medical bills for her mother. David's hand found mine across the table with perfect timing as he suggested we should help people we care about. "I don't know what I'd do without friends like you," Elena said, tears gathering in her eyes. "Mom's treatment is so expensive, and my job barely covers my own expenses." I set down my wine glass and leaned forward with concern. "Elena, you know you can always come to me if you need help. We're family." The word family made David squeeze my hand approvingly. He had no idea I was remembering how Elena had used that same word to justify sleeping with him. "I couldn't possibly ask you for money," Elena protested weakly. "You're not asking. I'm offering." I reached across the table and covered her hand with my free one. "How much do you need?" The relief that flashed across both their faces was almost comical. "Maybe 5,000? Elena whispered. "Just as a loan, of course." In my first life, I'd immediately written her a check for 10,000, insisting she take extra in case there were more expenses. This time, I had different plans. "Of course," I said warmly, "but let me do you one better. Why don't you let me pay the medical bills directly? That way you won't have to worry about handling such a large amount of cash." For just a moment, Eleanor's mask slipped. I saw the flash of panic in her eyes before she recovered. That's so thoughtful, but I wouldn't want to burden you with the paperwork." "No burden at all," I insisted cheerfully. "Just give me the hospital information and I'll handle everything tomorrow. It's what friends do for each other." David jumped in smoothly. "Actually, honey, Elena might be more comfortable handling this herself. You know how proud she is." I tilted my head innocently. "But wouldn't it be easier this way? Then, Elena doesn't have to worry about depositing checks or managing payments." The tension in the room was delicious. They'd planned for me to hand over cash they could use for whatever they actually wanted. Direct medical payments would ruin everything. Elena forced a grateful smile. "You know what? You're absolutely right. Let me get you those details." She disappeared into the bathroom, probably to text her imaginary medical contacts to create fake bills. I'd give her time to scramble. David and I were alone for the first time that evening. He pulled his chair closer to mine, his expression tender. "You have such a generous heart, Olivia. It's one of the things I love most about you. Love. The word felt like acid coming from his lips. I just want to help the people who matter to me, I said softly. Speaking of which, I had the most wonderful idea today. Oh? I took a sip of wine, building suspense. I was thinking about our wedding timeline. June feels so far away, doesn't it? His eyes sharpened with interest. What are you suggesting? Maybe we should move it up? April, perhaps? Or even March? I watched his face carefully. I'm just so excited to start our life together. And honestly, planning this big, elaborate wedding feels exhausting. What if we did something smaller and sooner? David's mind was clearly racing. A sooner wedding meant faster access to my money, but less time to manipulate the prenup negotiations. I could practically see him calculating pros and cons. That's actually a great idea, he said slowly. But wouldn't your parents want time to plan something befitting the Morrison family? They'll understand if I explain that we're just too in love to wait, I said, batting my eyelashes. Besides, we could always have a bigger celebration later for our first anniversary. Elena returned from the bathroom, her composure restored. Sorry about that. Here's the hospital information. She handed me a piece of paper with hastily scribbled details. I glanced at it briefly, noting several obvious inconsistencies that confirmed my suspicions about fake medical bills. Perfect, I said, folding it carefully. I'll call first thing tomorrow morning. So, Elena said, settling back into her chair, what were you two talking about while I was gone? Olivia wants to move up the wedding, David announced, watching Elena's reaction. Elena's fork clattered against her plate. For someone who was supposedly just a friend, she looked remarkably distressed by this news. Move it up? But, don't you want time to plan everything perfectly? Love doesn't wait for perfect timing, I said dreamily. David and I have been together long enough to know this is right. Why wait? Elena's eyes darted between David and me. I could see her mental calculations too. If I married David in March, her pregnancy wouldn't be showing enough to cause problems. But if we married in April or May, March might be rushing things, David said carefully. April gives us more time to handle all the legal paperwork, the prenup, the venue bookings. Ah, there it was. They needed more time to plan their theft. You're probably right, I agreed easily. April it is then. That gives us just enough time to get everything in order. Elena visibly relaxed. April sounds perfect. A spring wedding will be beautiful. We spent the rest of the evening discussing wedding plans, each of us playing our roles perfectly. I gushed about dress shopping and flower arrangements while they nodded and smiled, all of us pretending this was about love instead of larceny. As I prepared to leave, David walked me to my car. Thank you for being so understanding about Elena, he said, wrapping his arms around me. I know she can be a lot sometimes, but she's family to both of us now. Of course, I murmured against his chest, letting him hold me while I fought down the urge to knee him in the stomach. I love how much you care about the people in your life. It makes me love you even more. He pulled back to look at my face, searching for any sign of suspicion. Finding only adoration, he smiled that devastating smile that had fooled me so completely before. I love you too, Olivia, more than you'll ever know. As I drove home, I allowed myself a small cold smile. They thought they were so clever, accelerating their timeline and tightening their web around me. They had no idea I was about to turn their own trap against them. Tomorrow, the real games would begin. The next morning, I called the hospital number Elena had given me at exactly 9 a.m. As expected, no such patient existed. The phone number led to a disconnected line. Elena's fake medical emergency was unraveling before she even knew I'd started pulling threads. But I wasn't ready to expose her yet. Instead, I called Elena directly. The strangest thing happened, I told her, infusing my voice with confusion. I tried calling the hospital, but they said they don't have anyone by your mother's name in their system. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. Oh, that's because she's registered under her maiden name for privacy reasons. Let me get you the correct information. Don't worry about it right now, I said sweetly. Why don't we meet for lunch today? We can sort it out then, and I can write you a check instead. Elena's relief was audible. That would be perfect. Thank you so much, Olivia. 3 hours later, I sat across from Elena at our usual cafe, watching her fidget with her coffee cup. She'd obviously spent the morning creating new fake documents, and the stress was showing. You look tired, I observed gently. Are you sleeping okay? Just worried about Mum, she replied quickly. And actually, there's something else I've been meaning to tell you. Here it comes, I thought. This was where she would plant seeds about David's supposed work stress and emotional distance to justify their increased time together. David's been having a really hard time at work lately, she continued, right on schedule. I think he's worried about providing for you the way you deserve. He's been staying late every night this week. In reality, those late nights were spent in Eleanor's bed, but I played my part perfectly. He hasn't mentioned anything to me, I said, frowning with concern. Should I talk to him about it? Maybe give him some space to work through it himself? Sometimes men need to feel like they can handle their problems independently. Elena leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think he's intimidated by your family's wealth. He loves you so much, but he wants to feel worthy of you. The manipulation was so textbook, I almost applauded. Create artificial distance between David and me, while positioning herself as the understanding confidant who truly got him. That makes sense, I mused. Maybe I should back off a bit. Give him room to breathe. Eleanor's smile was triumphant. I think that's really wise. And if you ever need someone to talk to about it, I'm here for you. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. What would I do without you? After lunch, I drove straight to my father's law firm. James Morrison was many things. Controlling, demanding, ruthless in business. But he was also fiercely protective of his family fortune. When I walked into his corner office, his weathered face lit up with genuine affection. Olivia, what brings you here, sweetheart? I need to discuss the prenup for David, I said, settling into the chair across from his massive desk. His expression immediately sharpened. Having second thoughts about the boy? Not exactly, but I want to make some additions to the standard agreement. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning, filled with carefully researched legal documents. I want to include a morality clause. Dad raised an eyebrow. That's unusual for a prenup. What kind of morality clause? If either party commits adultery during the engagement or marriage, they forfeit all rights to marital assets and spousal support. I met his eyes steadily. Additionally, any financial gifts given during the relationship must be repaid immediately upon dissolution. Dad leaned back in his leather chair, studying me. That's a harsh clause, Olivia. Most people don't include adultery provisions in prenups because they're difficult to prove and can get messy in court. Then, let's make the burden of proof very clear. Physical evidence, documented proof, or admission of guilt. I slid another document across his desk. I also want to include a provision about fraudulent claims for financial assistance. If someone uses false information to obtain money from either party, it constitutes theft and breach of contract. Now, Dad was really intrigued. These are very specific provisions. Is there something you're not telling me? I gave him my most innocent smile. I just want to protect both David and myself from any potential misunderstandings. Love is wonderful, but legal clarity is better. Dad chuckled approvingly. Spoken like a true Morrison. I'll have these drafted immediately. When do you need them ready? The signing is scheduled for next week. David's been eager to get the paperwork finalised. That evening, David called me just as I expected. Elena had obviously briefed him on our lunch conversation. "Hey, beautiful, I'm sorry I've been so distant lately," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound stressed but loving. "Work has been overwhelming." "Elena mentioned you've been having a tough time," I replied softly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I want to help. I didn't want to burden you with my problems. You have enough on your plate with wedding planning." He paused dramatically. "Actually, would you mind if I took some space this week? Just to get my head straight before we signed the prenup?" Perfect. He was playing right into their plan to spend more time together while making me think it was about work stress. "Of course," I said understandingly. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." "You're incredible, Olivia. I don't deserve you." At least that part was true. Over the next few days, I played my role flawlessly. I gave David his requested space, sent encouraging texts about his work situation, and made plans to go shopping with Elena for wedding decorations. Meanwhile, I was busy with my own preparations. I hired a private investigator, not to gather evidence I already possessed, but to document everything that was about to happen. I also arranged for security cameras to be installed in my apartment, my car, and several other strategic locations. When this all went down, I wanted every moment recorded. On Thursday, Eleanor called me in tears. "Olivia, I am so sorry to bother you, but something terrible has happened." I gripped the phone tighter, remembering this exact conversation from my first life. "What's wrong?" "I went to the doctor today for a routine checkup, and they found something concerning. They need to run more tests, expensive ones that my insurance won't cover." The pregnancy announcement delivered as a medical crisis. Elena's acting had always been Oscar-worthy. "How much do you need?" I asked immediately. "It's so much money. I can't ask you for this." "Eleanor, your family. Tell me." $15,000, she whispered. "But I understand if that's too much." In my first life, I'd written the check immediately, never questioning why she needed such an enormous amount for tests. This time, I had different plans. "Don't worry about the money," I said firmly. "But Eleanor, this sounds serious. I want to come with you to the appointment. You shouldn't face this alone." Silence stretched between us. That's so sweet of you, but you don't need to do that." "I insist. What's the name of your doctor? I'll meet you there tomorrow." More silence. "Actually, Olivia, let me call you back. I need to check when the next appointment is available." She hung up quickly, and I smiled. Elena was trapped now. She could either produce a fake doctor and risk exposure, or admit she'd been lying. Either way, she was cornered. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time, it was David. "Olivia, Eleanor told me about her medical situation. I think we should help her, but maybe we should handle this delicately. She's proud, and having you at the doctor's appointment might embarrass her." "I'm just worried about her," I said. "This sounds so serious." "I know you are. That's why I love you so much." His voice dropped to that intimate tone he used when he wanted something. "What if I go with her instead? As a friend? Then I can report back to you about what the doctor says." And there it was. David positioning himself as Eleanor's primary support while pushing me away from the situation. They thought they were so clever. "That's actually a wonderful idea," I said warmly. "You're such a good friend to her, David. It means everything to me that the two people I love most care about each other." "We both love you too, Olivia, more than you know." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but laugh. They loved my money, certainly. But love me? They were about to learn the difference between those two things the hard way. Tomorrow, Eleanor would be forced to either confess her lies or dig herself deeper into a hole she couldn't climb out of. Either way, I would be ready. The prenup signing was in 3 days, and I had never been more excited for a legal appointment in my life. The morning of the prenup signing dawned crisp and clear. I dressed carefully in a cream-coloured suit that made me look both innocent and powerful, the perfect combination for what was about to unfold. Elena had called the night before, her voice shaky as she claimed her test results wouldn't be ready for another week. I'd expressed appropriate concern while internally celebrating her desperation. David had been suspiciously supportive of postponing any medical discussions until after our prenup was signed. They thought they were in control. They had no idea they were walking into their own execution. I arrived at my father's law firm 15 minutes early. Dad was already there, along with his senior partner Robert Hayes and a stenographer I didn't recognise. The conference room table was set with copies of the prenup, each page meticulously prepared according to my specifications. "Everything is exactly as you requested," Dad said quietly. "The morality clause, the fraud provisions, the immediate asset forfeiture terms. Are you certain about this, Olivia?" I smiled serenely. Absolutely certain. David arrived precisely on time, looking handsome and nervous in his best navy suit. He kissed my cheek tenderly, playing the devoted fiancé to perfection. "Ready for this? Beautiful?" he murmured against my ear. "More than ready," I whispered back, meaning every word. Elena slipped in 5 minutes later, claiming she'd come for moral support. She wore a loose-fitting dress that cleverly disguised her growing belly, but I noticed how her hand kept drifting protectively to her midsection. "I hope you don't mind me being here," she said apologetically. "David thought I might help keep you calm during the legal stuff." "Of course not," I said warmly. "You're family." Robert Hayes cleared his throat professionally. "Shall we begin? Mr. Wellington, Miss Morrison, please take seats on opposite sides of the table. Miss Rodriguez, you're welcome to observe from the chair by the window." As David settled across from me, I watched his confident expression falter slightly as he began reading the document. The standard prenup language was familiar, but my additions were clearly catching his attention. "This is quite comprehensive," he said slowly, flipping through pages. "What's this morality clause about?" Dad leaned forward. "It's a protection provision. If either party commits adultery, they forfeit all rights to marital assets and must repay any financial gifts received during the relationship." David's face went pale. "That's pretty harsh, don't you think?" "It protects both of us," I said sweetly. "After all, if we're faithful to each other, we have nothing to worry about, right?" Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I noticed her breathing had become slightly laboured. Pregnancy symptoms were clearly intensifying. "And this fraud clause?" David continued reading, his voice strained. "Standard protection against false claims for financial assistance," Robert explained matter-of-factly. "If someone uses deceptive information to obtain money, it constitutes theft and breach of contract." I watched Elena's reflection in the conference room window. She had gone completely white and was gripping the arms of her chair. David set down the papers, his charming mask finally slipping. "Olivia, this feels like you don't trust me." "I trust you completely," I said, my voice dripping with false innocence. "That's why I know you won't have any problem signing it." The silence stretched painfully. David glanced at Elena, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, he picked up the pen. "You're right," he said, forcing a smile. "If we love each other, this is just paperwork." He began signing each page methodically. With every signature, I felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. He was literally signing his own financial death warrant. When he finished, Robert slid the documents across to me. I picked up my pen with flourish, ready to complete their destruction. That's when Elena suddenly gasped and doubled over in her chair. "Elena!" David jumped up immediately, his mask of indifference cracking completely. "What's wrong?" I think," she panted, her hand pressed to her stomach. "Oh God, something's wrong with the baby." The room went dead silent. Elena's eyes went wide as she realised what she'd just said. Dad's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Baby?" Elena tried to backtrack frantically. I meant if I ever had a baby, hypothetically." But David had already rushed to her side, his face twisted with genuine panic. "Elena, is the baby okay? Should I call a doctor?" His words hung in the air like a death sentence. There was no taking them back now. Robert Hayes stopped writing and looked up sharply. Dad's expression had turned to stone. The stenographer continued typing, documenting every damning word. I stood slowly, setting down my unsigned pen. "Baby?" I repeated softly. "Eleanor, are you pregnant?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she realised the trap had finally closed around them. "Olivia, I can explain." "Please do," I said, my voice still dangerously calm, "because David seems remarkably concerned about your baby's welfare for someone who's supposed to be marrying me in 3 weeks. David straightened, his face cycling through panic, anger, and finally resignation. "Olivia." "How far along are you, Elena?" I continued relentlessly. "Because you look like you're showing, which means this baby was conceived months ago." Elena burst into tears. "We didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Like what?" I took a step closer. "You didn't mean to get pregnant by my fiancé while pretending to be my best friend. Or you didn't mean to get caught." David finally found his voice, but instead of remorse, I heard defiance. "Yes, Elena's pregnant. Yes, it's my baby. We've been together this whole time." The confession hit the room like a bomb, but I wasn't finished. "And the medical bills? The money I've been giving Elena for her mother's treatment?" Eleanor's sobbing intensified. "There is no treatment. My mother is fine." "So you've been stealing from me while sleeping with my fiancé?" I turned to David. "How long have you been planning this? Since before we met?" David's jaw tightened. "We tried to stay away from each other, but we couldn't. We love each other, Olivia." "Love," I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call plotting to steal my inheritance? Because that's what this prenup signing was really about, wasn't it? You needed me legally tied to you before Elena started showing." The truth was finally out, hanging between us like poison gas. But I wasn't done destroying them yet. I walked over to my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "You know what's interesting about getting a second chance at life? You remember every detail of what people did to you." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Olivia, I have documentation of every lie Elena told me about her medical expenses. Phone records showing David and Elena have been in contact constantly throughout our relationship. Financial records showing Elena deposited my loans directly into a joint account she shares with David." I smiled coldly. "And photographs?" Elena went completely white. "Photographs? From the private investigator I hired last week. Very interesting pictures of you two together, including ones that clearly show Elena's pregnancy." David lunged toward me, but Dad and Robert immediately stepped between us. "You set us up." "I gave you every chance to be honest," I replied calmly. "You chose to keep lying, keep stealing, keep planning to ruin my life for money." Elena was hyperventilating now. "We'll give back the money." "Too late for that." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. "I have already forwarded all the evidence to the district attorney's office. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. You're looking at serious jail time." David's face contorted with rage. "You vindictive bitch. We could have worked this out. The way we worked it out when I died in a car accident while processing your betrayal." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Everyone stared at me in confusion, but I quickly recovered. "What I mean is, this ends now. David, you signed that prenup, which means you just legally acknowledged that adultery voids all your rights to my assets. Elena, every dollar you stole from me is documented and will be repaid with interest. Robert cleared his throat. Actually, since Mr. Wellington signed the prenup and then immediately admitted to adultery, the financial fraud provisions are now legally enforceable. I looked at David with cold satisfaction, which means not only do you get nothing from me, but you owe me every gift I ever gave you, plus damages, plus Elena's stolen money. Elena collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. David stood frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd lost. The wedding is cancelled, obviously, I continued conversationally. Your belongings will be returned to you. Elena, I'll expect my money repaid within 30 days, or I'll be forced to pursue criminal charges. I gathered my purse and walked toward the door, pausing only to look back at them one final time. You know what the real tragedy is? I actually loved both of you. I would have helped Elena if she just asked honestly. I would have shared everything with David if he'd actually loved me. Elena looked up through her tears. Olivia, please. But you chose to lie, cheat, and steal instead. You chose to destroy someone who cared about you. I smiled one last time, cold and final. I hope your love was worth it, because it's all you have left. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse apartment, watching the sunset paint the city gold. David had been forced to declare bankruptcy, paying back the money they'd stolen. Elena was working 3 jobs trying to support her baby alone, after David abandoned her when the money dried up. My phone buzzed with a text from my new lawyer. Wellington, fraud case closed, full restitution received, Rodriguez making final payment tomorrow. I deleted the message without responding. They were my past now, and my future was limitless. As I sipped my wine and watched the lights twinkle to life across the city, I smiled. This time I had won completely, and it felt absolutely perfect.